The night may be long and the dark may be deep, but the answers are there to be found. Whether it's the normal, the abnormal, or the paranormal, you're in the right place. Let's go beyond reality.
Welcome to the show. I hope everybody had a great weekend. I hope everybody's ready for a great week. We're going to kick the week off with a terrific discussion with Susan Demeter. Susan is going to talk to us about witchcraft, being a witch, her paranormal experiences. She's a paranormal researcher, also an author, and she's an artist. And she's going to talk about all those parts of her life with us tonight as we chat about, whenever we talk about witches and witchcraft, there's always a little bit of a gray area. Some people think this is, it's a topic that involves satanic worship and that kind of thing. And that's certainly not what we're talking about here. But we'll let Susan explain it to you when she comes on in just a little bit. Anyway, I hope you've been well. I hope everybody is staying safe. My voice is a little hoarse right now, which you might be able to tell because I played a gig on Saturday with my band. And in a year where, let's see, since January, we've played 3 gigs. So when we play a gig, it has quite an effect because, my vocal cords are out of shape. My whole body was like, I felt like a truck had run over me after playing that gig. It was a lot of fun to play because I love playing, and I've got a great band. These guys are wonderful. But at the same time, it was grueling because they're just out of shape. We're not doing it at all. And that's one of the tragedies as well. Not only do I not get to go out and see live music, which I love to do, but I can't go out and play live music, which I love to do even more. So it's hopefully those things will return to normal sometime within the next few months. I can give it a few more months, but after that, I'm going to start playing on the streets. I can't do it in upstate New York in the winter, though. That won't work, but I'll figure something out. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. Find us just by searching for JV Johnson and subscribe to the channel. Also on Twitch. If you're a Twitch subscriber or you have been and you used your Amazon Prime account to make that subscription, which means you can do it for free, please go back to the Twitch channel and renew that because they do expire each month and you've got to renew them each month. So again, on Twitch, it's JV Johnson as well. Very, very easy to find. So with that, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll have our guest on the program. And again, tonight we're talking with Susan Demeter, and she is a witch and a paranormal investigator and researcher and an artist. We're going to talk about all of that on the program tonight with Susan. It's Beyond Reality, and we'll be right back. Please support the program. Go to patreon.com/Johaw. That's JOHAW. We've got a great program for you tonight. Going to have a fantastic discussion. Our guest is Susan Demeter. Susan is a Canadian-born scholar, author, artist, and witch. And the themes of her writing and her research, her art, and spirituality incorporate her lifelong interest in exceptional human experiences, the paranormal, UFOs, nature, social history, mysteries, and cosmic magic. And we're pleased to have Susan on. Susan, welcome to the program. Now, where exactly in the world are you? Are you in Italy?
Yes, I am, and it's very early, so I've had my coffee. It's about 5 a.m. where I'm at. Well, and hopefully I'll be coherent for you.
Well, we greatly appreciate you making the effort to make it an early morning to be with us. Now, you're a Canadian-born scholar, as your bio says. How'd you end up in Italy?
Actually, I ended up here, first of all, through a series of strange synchronicities, because that seems to be the way of my life. And also because I'm married to an Italian astrophysicist.
Oh, wow. Well, that'll do it.
You could say that there is synchronicity and there's love.
And if I read everything that you sent us correctly, are you in the northern part of Italy near Bologna?
Yes, actually, I'm in the Apennine Mountains in a small sort of ancient village that is very close to Bologna and Florence. So in the Apennine Mountain areas there of Bologna.
Well, I have often said, first of all, my mother was born in Italy, so that's a big part of my ancestry. And I've been to Italy many times visiting family there. And my favorite city, and I've traveled fairly extensively throughout Europe, my favorite city in the world is Florence. What a beautiful city that is.
Yes, it is all with the art and the history and the food and the people. It's just
and I
definitely.
imagine with your work and your sensitivities and the things that you've studied as it relates to the paranormal, you must find a lot of energy in cities like Florence, or as you said, an ancient medieval village that you might either live in or encounter throughout any part of northern Italy. I would assume there's a lot of energy there.
Absolutely. And it's sometimes being a North American, I'm still sort of absorbing the vibe, so to speak, out here.
Mm-hmm.
And it is wonderful. The nature here is wonderful. It's almost as if it is at peace with the people here, versus where in North America, when I would go out camping and I would be places where I'd be like totally sort of, the nature was much more raw. Mm-hmm. Here, I feel out in the mountains, and that there's this beautiful harmony between people, probably because it's been settled for millennia,
right?
And so there's this really, really beautiful vibe that is out here in Italy.
It really is,
on top of everything else. Yeah.
And anybody, and anybody who hasn't had the benefit of actually touring a place like Italy, it's hard to explain the magic. I mean, I just know that, when you're cruising around the countryside, and I did that quite a bit. I'd rent a car and I just travel for weeks throughout the Italian peninsula. And, on like every hill, there's ruins, or even in some cases, a full castle. They're just sitting on these hills and just complete reminders of what I would say is a completely gone or bygone era. However, what should I say? The culture that was created by that bygone era still lives with us today in a lot of respects. And I know this is not what we're here to talk about, but I'm just so fascinated by the discussion, and because you're there in the heart of it, I find it very interesting.
Oh yeah, no, it absolutely, it is very interesting, and it does lead into the magic. I mean, where I am in particular is there are a lot of ancient Etruscan sort of runes and ancient Celtic runes. So there's a huge pagan sort of history here that predates Rome. And it's amazing to be able to walk down these sort of cobblestoned roadways in the middle of sort of the mountains and nowhere, where the ancient hands were on these stones and they were building these roads. And so it is fascinating, and there's a huge sort of supernatural sort of vibe here as well, and including UFOs. So it's like there's a lot happening here.
So
for the people that are into history, supernatural and things.
Let's get a sense of how you became interested in either being a witch or just the paranormal in general. Which of those two things came first for you?
I think that the paranormal and having supernatural experiences as a child sort of led me down the path to where I am now, and to where I'm comfortable acknowledging the fact of that I am a witch, and that I do witchcraft as a daily part of my life. I started having experiences as a young child with little beings, which as a kid, I guess because my only sort of reference point was watching like Scooby-Doo and shows like that I thought these beings were like ghosts,
right.
And they frightened me, and they startled me, but they also intrigued and fascinated me at the same time. But as I became more of a teenager and a young adult, I sort of tried to put these things off as maybe a bit of childhood imagination, or but I mean, they weren't. And at the age of about 23, I had a experience with a sort of a red glowing orb over a nuclear power installation. And I was with my then brother-in-law. And at that point, as a young adult and being with another adult and having this experience and seeing this thing that we couldn't explain it. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a helicopter. It wasn't this, that, that it sort of opened up my worldview. I call it in my book my first sort of initiation, because it literally served its purpose to sort of initiate me into an idea of another worldview, that there is more to this reality that we don't see or experience with our normal senses all the time. And that sort of allowed that flood of being able to become the witch and to sort of acknowledge my sort of psychic side, as well as my interest in other types of what I call cosmic magic. So astrology, tarot, working with celestial energies. This was all sort of initiated by experiences that I don't really like to label them because I don't 100% know what they are, but more commonly people would think of them as maybe UFO experiences.
I have to, first of all, I want to point out that your new book is called The Cosmic Witch, and we're going to get into that specifically a little bit further on in our discussion. But I want to go back to these childhood experiences you had when you said you encountered these little beings. I'm not certain how you landed on that. Did you ever determine, in retrospect maybe, what these beings may have been?
Like I said, as a child, I thought that they could have been maybe ghosts. The first one I talk about in the book was like a little sort of a blue sort of boy that I remember going on sort of flights with, sort of almost shamanic is what I would use as a term as an adult. But as a child, of course, I didn't have this terminology. But we would go on these flights and we would speak in our own language and sort of like in a telepathy kind of way. And then other ones were more like sinister. As an adult, it was put forward to me that maybe they could have been like a gray alien or something of that nature, or some type of little humanoid, or a lamb-like creature, like to borrow from Aleister Crowley, lamb. To be fair, I don't 100% know, but at the time, I would, as a child, I would sort of line my bed up with my stuffed animals as sort of like a little fort, and they really unnerved me. And I would occasionally have what would appear would be like a large wolf, and this wolf would be speaking to me and would be sort of a protector and would be scaring away these sort of beings. And later on, as a young adult, when I got into sort of Jungian psychology, I sort of sussed out the idea that I was the wolf, that I created this sort of wolf being that I was experiencing that was my own protector. And from that sort of led into later studies of mine into sort of these shamanic practices, particularly of witches here in northern Italy, that were called the Benedante, which translates into the good people or the good folk. And they would sort of do these shamanic sort of practices to shapeshift into wolves, so that they could protect their villages from what they viewed as evil or bad influences, so to protect their people and their crops and that. So I got very interested in that, and started researching the connections between these types of shamanic practices and something that maybe I was doing sort of without even realizing I was doing it as a little kid to sort of protect myself. So I discussed that in the book as well. The book Cosmic Witch is in part an autobiography. I put a lot of my heart into it, and sort of my experience interwoven with sort of references to all types of witchcraft.
Susan, where was these early childhood experiences? Where were they occurring? Were you growing up in Canada?
Yes, at the time I was born in Toronto, and at the time these experiences were occurring in a suburb of Toronto. And then later on, as a young adult, I moved to just outside of Toronto to Ajax, which is a community in Durham, which I experienced there. This is where I experienced some of the UFO things that I talked about as an adult. So it's sort of it's something that seems to have followed me throughout life, and I just more or less. I've gotten sort of used to it. I've gotten a handle on it, so to speak.
Yeah, there are people that come on the program that we kind of label loosely as paranormal magnets. They seem to have well more than their share of paranormal phenomena and sightings and encounters. I don't know if you consider yourself someone who falls into that category, but it sounds like you might. But I do need to ask you about the witch part of all of this. When did you identify and decide that that you were a witch? When did that happen?
Well, that's an interesting story in itself. I was doing all sorts of things that one would consider, part of witchcraft, and I follow the holy wheel, and I borrow a lot. My own witchcraft borrows a lot from Wicca, but I think that it was really when I was able to sort of come out and say publicly I'm a witch is I was having a lunch several years ago with a fellow, his name is Dr. Adam Crabtree, and he is a practicing psychologist in Toronto. He's also a fellow of the Esalen Institute in California, which some of your listeners might be familiar with. And he had some very interesting experiences, synchronistic experiences with Bobby Kennedy at the time of the Kennedy assassination.
Oh, wow.
So he's a very, very interesting, very cultured man. And I was sitting there and I was describing to him some of the experiments I was doing in sort of what I would term social psi, and based around the Philip experiments that were done in Toronto in the 1970s. So these are experiments to try and make this, trying to condense this, make this quick. They were a series of experiments by a group of people, the Toronto Psychical Research Society, who were trying to create a poltergeist to see if they could do that sort of like a mind, like with the ESP.
Sure.
And I figured, and they wrote a book, Conjuring Up Philip, which I became very intrigued with. And I ended up trying to do something similar, I thought, with a UFO. And so I was sitting with Adam Crabtree, and I was explaining to him sort of my experiments in psi and psychic phenomena and the idea of conjuring UFOs. And he said to me, Susan, he said, 500 years ago, they would have burned you at the stake as a witch. And it struck me. And I thought, you know what? I am doing witchcraft. And it is part of my spirituality. I've sort of, I was a pagan from a very early age. And I thought, you know what? Why not just come out and say, yeah, I am. I'm a cosmic witch. And so that's how it sort of evolved. But I mean, I was doing witchcraft before that, but there is such a connotation around the word witch that I was more comfortable telling people at the time. I was working in a very conservative industry, in the insurance industry. I was much more comfortable telling people, oh, I've got this side issue, and my hobby is sort of researching UFOs, because with that you can sort of wrap it up in skeptical language, and you don't seem to be like the crazy person. But coming out and saying, I'm a witch, and that there is such a negative connotation still. And in some places in the world, just saying you're a witch or being labeled a witch can get you killed. It didn't even now. That it wasn't until that point where I felt comfortable, saying, yes, I am a witch, and what I do is witchcraft, and being very comfortable in my own sort of skin, so to speak, and being able to come to a point where I can write this book.
I find it fascinating that you had a bit of an epiphany when you were trying to conduct what I would consider, and I think you considered at the time, to be just some research, basically trying an experiment, which experimenting is part of the scientific method, the scientific process. And then you realized, hey, yeah. I mean, it's kind of witchcraft. So I guess that kind of makes me think that one person's science experiment is another person's witchcraft. Where's that line? Where does that line exist?
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I've had that discussion with my husband before. He's an astrophysicist.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, how that goes over with your husband.
Well, he kind of keeps me grounded, which is good. But I mean, the thing with witchcraft and with paganism in general is that it is so interwoven with the physical world that it actually does work with science. And many of the scientific disciplines, including astronomy and that, these were born of things like for instance, chemistry came from alchemy, and these sort of like even astronomy is astrology. With these were they in the ancient times or the medieval times, like here, for instance, in Bologna, at the University of Bologna, they were doing alchemy in the university. They were doing astrology in the universities. They were playing around with necromancy and things like this. So, I mean, that was considered normal, and it sort of evolved into the science that we know today. So it does work with, in my opinion, witchcraft works with science, which is the belief in paganism. If you're a pagan, it does sort of work with the idea of the physical world, because it is tied to the physical world.
So let's go back to this experiment. Yeah, let's go back to this experiment that you had been contemplating. I'm not sure if you ever were able to effectuate it, but you were considering kind of using the model of the group that you referenced. I think was it the Toronto Psychical Research Group? Is that what it was? Yeah.
Yes.
And they were trying to basically create poltergeist activity. And of course, poltergeist activity is often considered to be something that is manifested through some type of human activity or behavior. So you were taking that model and you were trying to apply it to the UFO phenomena. So I have a couple questions about that. First of all, did you do it and were you successful? But secondly, at what point did you start to believe that that UFO activity might be something that can be manifested from something that we do as humans, whether it's witchcraft or whether it's something, mind control or whatever it happens to be?
Well, when I first had my UFO experiences, I immediately went to the base model of the ETH, or the Extraterrestrial Hypothesis. Mm-hmm. Because that was what the literature was that was out there. When I had my first experience, it was 1990. There was no internet. So I went to the library, and I found a book by Dr. Alan Hynek, and I tried to write to him, but unfortunately my letter came back, returned to sender. And I didn't know, but at that point he had already passed on.
Oh, it's a shame.
And yes, but but interestingly enough, it was through my finding him that I found out he was interested in the Toronto Psychical Research Society. So there's all these little connections that sort of lead one down a path if you sort of pay attention to the synchronicities.
Right.
So he was very interested in the Philip phenomenon. I was fortunate enough years later to get a hold of some correspondence he had with the Owens who were conducting the Philip group. Well, anyway, it at the beginning, I sort of had this idea that, like, the mainstream for ufology, that it was, that this was ET related. And certainly it still may be. I don't 100% know. But the idea sort of evolved through my research that, we've been looking at this through the lenses of the ETH now for maybe 70 years or more even. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we really don't have a firm idea. It hasn't brought us anywhere. So I started looking at some of the more alternative ideas, things that were put forth by Dr. Jacques Vallée, that sort of demonstrates that a lot of these experiences, can go back to the fairy faith or fairy lore or even demonic things. So this sort of just got my brain sort of whirring in a different direction. And I thought, well, if the Owens, and certainly if Alan Hynek was interested in what they were doing, if they were trying to create, now they did create a poltergeist, but I think that the goal was to create an apparition. So what they did is they created a fictional narrative because they wanted to absolutely make sure that what they were doing was fictional, that was coming from the people's mind, and it wasn't some other outside entity. That they created this fictional narrative with a group of people that they had pooled from different points in society. The only thing that was sort of common amongst them was the fact that they were all very creative people. And so from that, they sort of talked about and created this fictional story, this group, and in a sort of a seance-like setting, they did manage to create the poltergeist activity. Now, for my purposes, now this was all done in the 70s. And so it was a lot easier, I think, to get a group of people to come out and commit to maybe one night a week and hang out and sort of bond. In today's day and age, it's a little bit more difficult, certainly now during the pandemic, but I mean, like, to get people together. So what I did is I tried to recreate that using private internet groups. And I did have some success, and that's going to be the sort of subject of the Cosmic Witch Volume 2, which hopefully will be out in 2021, which really dives more into my personal, it's sort of like opening up the magic cookbook, so to speak, and showing people what I did as an experiment. So for anybody who may be wanting to build on that or to do their own experiments, I think that it would be really interesting to see how other people might be influenced by that. But that is what I sort of did. And what I did is sort of pull people together that didn't really know each other and sort of foster a sort of camaraderie amongst each other. So we'd be talking on the internet and sort of concentrating on creating a sort of a light and then a sort of a spaceship type thing. And what we did is we picked 6 different sort of geo coordinates around the world that are known places where UFOs appear. And then one that is, that no one's ever reported, sort of, or an area of the world. And we sort of just mixed that up and did it as like a double-blind experiment. So we got one person who was a UFO experiencer to sort of, that wasn't part of the group, to sort of pick a location and sort of put that away. And for a year, we concentrated and created this sort of an atmosphere of creating a UFO. And after we got confirmation of potential confirmation on the internet of people seeing a UFO in a specific location, we were able then to go back and look at the geo coordinate matched, which was very, very thrilling for me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, all of this could be coincidental, but it was sort of the first one that we attempted. Now I'm working on one right now with a different group of people, and it's slightly different parameters. And I've done other experiments as well, including just writing narrative, just creative play that is fictional. In that case, a fictional narrative in a UFO sort of hotspot to see if this will provoke a UFO sighting. So these are some of the things I've done. It's actually, I hope I've explained it well, because it's.
Yeah, no, I think you have. Yeah, I think you have. But you know, I find it odd that, I don't know if odd is the word. I find it curious that ultimately that, and I don't know if it was you that decided, you know what, this is kind of witchcraft, so therefore I am a witch. Therefore, I'm gonna admit it, and I'm gonna proclaim it, and I'm going to practice it. It really sounds very scientific to me, what you were doing. And maybe that's, I mean, I'm not suggesting it's incompatible. Maybe it's very compatible, but it really truly sounds like what I would consider to be very scientific.
Well, thank you. I want it to, I want it to be, I try to wrap it up. I could speak in sort of using words that would be more, say, maybe magical, or I could wrap it up more in scientific language, and it sounds like 2 different things, but it's actually the exact same. I do want this to be accessible to others outside of the magical community as well. So I'm careful how I couch my words, but I do feel that there is a science to it, and there's a whole chapter in Cosmic Witch, which is sort of discusses how science is compatible and talks about some of the magical people. People like Jack Parsons, for instance, from JPL, who's a rocket scientist, who is also doing all sorts of magic. So I talk about people like that as well in the book. Um, and for me, it goes a little bit more in as far as the witch part is that I have, like I said, I have taken on a lot of the traditions of sort of Wicca, which I incorporate sort of in my own eclectic kind of magic. And so it's a spiritual practice for me as well as sort of the scientific sort of experiments on the side that I'm doing.
So help us out. If someone were to enter this discussion for the first time, not hear any other discussion where someone has said they are a witch and they practice witchcraft, so they've got no ideas of what this really is, how would you define the word witch?
Oh, that's a good question because in the book I also discuss how depending upon who the person is you ask, they'll have probably a different answer. It's a very broad and witchcraft is also
That's
very
right.
broad. Um, yeah, for me, it is part of my spiritual practice being a pagan. And it's sort of rooted in that sort of revival of sort of ancient practices. So it to me it's more of a religion. For other people, it may not be, and some people they just they like the sort of rebellious aspect of witch. So it really it's an individual thing, whether it's going to be something that's more social or perhaps more spiritual or even religious. It really depends. So I discuss like I break that down. Like I said in the book, I break down all the different types and different types of traditions that people follow. I mean, there are some people that prefer to be in a coven, and there are initiations to be within the coven. So there's a hierarchy and tradition there. There are other people like myself who I guess I'm a very eclectic person, and so therefore I can't be sort of pinned into one sort of tradition or thing. So I borrow a lot from various traditions, and sort of I've created my own spirituality, which a lot of people do that as well. So it really it depends, and then there are people who just they view witch from the really pop culture sense, which I also discuss in the book, pop culture influences and sort of, that can be anything from the Good Witch, which is like, Samantha from Bewitched, or, or the ladies from The Craft, or, the Wicked Witch of the West. So it's really, it's a very broad sort of term, depending upon who you ask.
We often talk about people misunderstanding the word witch. I tend to be of a mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, and this certainly is not meant to be disrespectful in any way, but I tend to be in the mind that the definition itself has changed. Not that it's necessarily been misunderstood. I think that originally a witch was something that was considered to be, if you go by the church's definition, then the church in many ways was the group that was prosecuting or persecuting anyone who was considered to be a witch, whether they identified or not. If they were accused of it, they generally got persecuted. But it was it was originally something that was, by their estimation, evil. And I think over time, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's changed. How do you see it?
Well, yes, it definitely has evolved. So from the ancient times to about where you start seeing the witch hunting craze in Europe.
Yeah.
There was almost a sort of a blueprint called the Hammer of the Witches, which was described by certain factions. Not everyone in the church or even the state was sort of on board with this idea. But there was the Hammer of the Witches, which was very misogynistic, very, very vile, and literally sort of was a blueprint for what we would consider, I guess, the archetype of the satanic witch. Sort of came from that point in time, and it was a means really of, if someone was different, or they were coming from a marginalized community, whether they were a witch or not, someone who'd be considered by the state an undesirable, they'd get labeled this, and they would be tortured and sometimes murdered. It was horrific. But certainly the idea of the witch sort of blends in with the fairy tale sort of witch of being this scary sort of a being, supernatural type being. So it evolves until you get to a point where in more modern times in the 20th and early 20th century, you start seeing a real revival of the old religions, paganism, and sort of a reconstruction of witchcraft in I guess, a more positive sense. So this is sort of going back to the early days of Wicca, and that sort of has, all the way through these waves of feminism where you see women really becoming empowered, and witchcraft and being the witch, like just the archetype of a powerful woman, whether she is a healer or a seductress or a rebellious woman or a wise woman. These are all very powerful, strong feminine archetype that I think really appeals to women. It's empowering. It's empowering to be a witch. Also for men, there are many male witches as well. But there is that iconic archetype of the strong, empowered female that has sort of evolved past those dark times of in the medieval times where women and men and children as well were being labeled witches,
right,
as a tangible thing. Yeah.
Right. So your book is called Cosmic Witch, and you identify as a cosmic witch. What's the difference between a witch and a cosmic witch?
I just cosmic because my influence and sort of my initiation into the idea of the supernatural is something that came through what I would consider the UFO type experience. Mm-hmm. And because at a very young age, I was drawn to astrology and sort of the planets and just astronomy as well. I feel that it is something that works for me. And I ultimately I work with various spirits, especially around here in Italy and where I am in the mountains. But at the same point, I feel that for me, my ultimate deity is a cosmic mother. So I really see sort of in my worldview that what I am doing is sort of a cosmic witchcraft. So hence the name.
And the motivation to write the book, was that to share your story, or was it to help people understand what it means to be a witch or a cosmic witch? Or is it an effort to introduce the idea to other people that you hope maybe there'll be others that will see the value of that lifestyle?
Well, originally, this wasn't going to be, this came about sort of, again, through synchronistic experience. I met my publisher, which is L'Editore. I met Claudio, who is the sort of the main publisher for that company. He was just starting up an esoteric sort of branch. It's a chess. It's a well-known chess publication they do, and I met him and I talked to him a little bit about my life and that, and he was like, well, what have you ever thought about doing a book on witchcraft? And sort of, enlightening people as to what this means and who witches are in the modern age. And I would love to publish something like that. So initially, when I thought I was going to write a book, it was going to be about the experiments. So UFOs and sort of social psi and sort of these types of ways of approaching UFO phenomena. But when I met my publisher and he said, have you ever thought of doing this? I would be really interested in publishing a book about this. I thought, you know what, this is perfect, because not only can I put together a really good reference book and sort of explain magical thinking and witches and the various tradition of witches, but I can also make it somewhat autobiographical, so that way it lays a foundation for the second book, which will be more about sort of those experiments and sort of using the tools of the witch to explore the paranormal, to explore UFO phenomena, something that is a very different way of doing things. So this book is a foundation for that. So that's how that came about. So it is really, it's all of those things you've mentioned, but it's sort of, it came about, it was even as a surprise to me. I'm so happy with the book and I'm so proud of it, but it really was sort of a series of little events that sort of put it together.
Isn't it interesting? I've had many authors. Yeah, I've had many authors on the program that have talked about their books and how when they set out to write something, but as they're writing, something else kind of takes over within them, and something else comes out. You know, it kind of develops a life of its own.
Yes, I truly believe that books have a life of their own.
It's interesting. What would you say? What would you say the difference is between? I don't know whether you want to do it on a given, like an example of a given day, or just in general lifestyle between you, someone who identifies as a witch, or someone who doesn't. What do you do differently that people are not witches don't do or do?
It's a part of my daily spiritual practice. It's part of what my life is, because I so strongly identify with the witch archetype and my own cosmic witchcraft. But I mean, for instance, I have altars. I have my daily sort of honoring table, where I am in gratitude, and I make offerings to the local spirits for helping me with my magic and guiding me in ways I don't really understand or know. So I feel I'm in servitude to a greater cause or a greater being, and that is enriching for me personally. And it is enriching with these experiments, which, as you pointed out, they can be scientific experiments, but I feel that they are served better by my witchcraft. It brings in that extra element that sort of drives them, particularly because I'm looking at examining, what I would also term as an exceptional human experience. So that is what I would say would maybe differentiate me. But I mean, it would be no different than maybe somebody who is in a mainstream religion saying prayers, or it's part of who I am, and it's part of my spirituality.
Do you have any, or have you had any moral conflicts through this process? Have you? I mean, I'm sure that being a child of Western civilization, we have certain norms that we are instilled into us as young people. Did you encounter any moral conflicts along the way, or did you find it completely compatible?
I found that with my witchcraft and my paganism, absolutely compatible. I was blessed with very liberal parents who sort of allowed us kids to explore and do what we needed to do. My father was a scientist. My mother was sort of a hippie stay-at-home mom. And so I was a child of the 70s. So, I mean, it to me, it felt natural. The only time I had any moral conflict is when I'm doing these sort of experiments and it's involving other people.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, initially I was thinking, well, not necessarily create a UFO, but create a gray alien to see if we can create an apparition of an alien. And I thought about how you could create a narrative and sort of make it safe, because people have had experiences with these beings that are quite horrific and causing all sorts of PTSD, and like there's a whole bunch of concerns in trying to create the gray alien, or any type of an alien, psychologically, if not, who knows what else. So these were experience. Like, I tried to create a narrative of, oh, well, if we talk about an alien that's maybe had a crash landing and we're helping it, and then maybe we can send it away at some point. But then I kind of scrapped that idea, because it's not something I could control, and I would not want to cause any harm to other people. That's just not cool.
Right.
So that's the only area where I've had moral sort of dilemma, and not necessarily with the witchcraft, because I don't I don't view it with that lens of sort of like a bad thing or an evil thing or which might be something that other people have.
We're talking tonight with Susan Demeter. Susan is an author, a paranormal researcher, and an artist. We're talking about her book, Cosmic Witch. Before we continue with the conversation, Susan, where can people find the book?
The book is on Amazon, as well as it can be ordered through independent bookstores or my publisher. You can also, all of the information as to what I'm doing and links to the books. It's also published in Italian language as well under La Strega. It is susandemeter.com.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I saw that you've had some work published in other languages. Is it exclusively Italian or other languages as well? Not that that's any small task. Not that that's any small accomplishment. That's big in itself. But just out of curiosity.
Just right now, it's in English and in Italian. But potentially French as well. So that's something being discussed for down the road, maybe in 2021.
Let's talk about witchcraft. Again, another word that some people may take and be concerned with. They may view it as something that is nefarious or evil or whatever word you want to attach to it. Explain to us what you're talking about when you're talking about witchcraft. You kind of compared it to prayer, I think a few minutes ago. So explain what it is.
Okay, so witchcraft, well, it certainly can be nefarious. It really depends on the intention of the witch. This, to me, witchcraft is sort of, how can I put this? Gaming reality a bit. It's using our influence to sort of shift the odds of reality to our favor, whatever outcome it is that we want.
Okay.
How's that for you?
That's a great way to describe it, yes.
Yes. So, I mean, whether it's healing or doing other types of spells, or just just practicing. Like I said, a lot of what I do could be compared to prayer or shamanic type work. All these types of things, like I said, are if we want to sort of shift reality to what we would like. These are just means. These are all just sort of ritual and tools to sort of gain what we would like to, the outcomes that we would like, sort of. And it never really 100% works out to the outcome that you want, but it shifts that sort of reality a bit.
And does it involve incantations? Does it involve reciting certain words? Does it involve any components? And I hate to use the word potions, but you know what I'm talking about when I say that.
Yes.
Does it involve any of those things?
It can involve any of those things or all of those things, depending upon the individual witch or the tradition or the coven. It depends. Like there's a whole section in the book on the tools of witchcraft. And in the end, I just sort of ended off with saying that the most important tool, of course, is the witch herself or himself. Because there's various different ways that people incorporate different things, props might be, or tools, to invoke and enact their own types of witchcraft. So it's sort of endless. Some of the things I use on my altar are things that I find in nature that I sort of create with my art. I view my painting as part of my witchcraft. So, I mean, there's all sorts of different ways. Robes, people dress the part of the witch.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of it is consider theater. But it
theater
is,
for, wait, sorry to interrupt, but theater for who? For the witch themselves? Because are there people observing it or not?
Well, I mean, it is for the witch herself or himself.
Okay.
That sort of allows what I would call psi, or the psychic component, to sort of activate.
That makes sense.
Because that is what in this is the magic part to me. The magic part to me is all related in psychic phenomena.
So
Psychic
can you give us an
style.
example of something you've done recently where you wanted to affect an outcome and you practiced what you would call witchcraft to try to affect that outcome?
I would say that that's something that I do on a daily sort of basis.
Can you
but
give
I
us a
also,
specific? Yeah, can you give us a specific one? Like, and again, I don't know what you personally would want to affect, but say you want to affect, say you were going to have a meeting and you wanted it to go well, and you want to try to affect that. What would you do?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I just, like I said, I have an altar, and I have actually more than one altar that I do make offerings to, and I ask the spirits for their guidance, and sort of the sorry, I'm still
No, it's okay. It's all right.
It's all, yeah, so we're just rounding 6:00 in the morning.
It's all right. You're doing
So
great.
I'm
doing great.
I'm trying to sound coherent for you.
No, you're doing a great job. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I would maybe enact a spell, like if I have a friend who is in pain or
okay, that's a good example. That's a good example. So you have a friend who is ill or in pain or something, and you want to try to help them. What would you do? Would you use some kind of substances and put them on the altar and give us really an example of the process you would go through to try to affect that.
Well, it depends on the individual person. Sometimes it could be as simple as writing their name.
Okay.
And sometimes we're writing a wish. For instance, this Yuletide is coming, so I will put wishes of mine, and I will put them into a pine cone, and I will probably burn it at my altar or burn it on my fireplace.
Okay.
So these are just wishes that I put out into the cosmos, that are my good intentions for people that I love and people I care about and that I might be worried about, especially at this time during the pandemic. So that's something very simple and basic, which I, as in my own witchcraft, is sort of simple and basic. I have worked in sort of what would be termed a more higher magic or ceremonial magic before. But in a general sense, on a sort of a daily sense, as you were mentioning, I do very simple sort of things, and mostly I keep myself sort of in service to the greater cause or the greater good. That to me is fulfilling for me.
Sure, yeah, no, it has to be. But as you've looked over your lifetime of doing this, for as long as you've been practicing this and try to affect outcomes, do you see a genuine result from the work? I mean, you must, or you wouldn't keep doing it.
I do, and sometimes I'm surprised. Sometimes I'll, like people will ask, psychics or people that are doing witchcraft, well, why don't you just conjure yourself up a lottery ticket and win the lottery? And I could never do that. I don't know what it is about that, but it's not me. But when I do things that are based, for instance, in love for another person, I can enact synchronicities that begin to occur that sort of guide that person into making decisions on things that are beneficial to them, or things that will happen that sort of make the path that they want easier. I'll probably talk a lot about that in the second book as well.
Oh, already planning a second. Already nice.
Yeah, that was. Yes, that will be the book that sort of is opening up the magic cookbook that will be discussing a lot of these things that you're asking me about.
Right.
But when I need something, for instance, like if I remember I was broke at some point a few years back, and I needed a journal or a book that I could write in, or something of that nature, and I sort of made this sort of wish out to the universe, and then I won this $50 gift certificate from a local bookstore, and I was able to get little things like that.
Yeah.
I can manifest. The bigger things, I think it takes more witches as a group to sort of work together. But I mean, these are sort of, I guess it's because I feel there's that sense of selfishness. So I don't overly try to manifest things for me personally. But when I do things, just to keep people that I love safe or out of harm's way or things like that, I will do little rituals at my altar, and mostly it involves making offerings to local spirits that I work with.
Okay, so I need to ask you about the
keep
spirits, because you've mentioned spirits a couple times. Who or what are the spirits that we're talking about here?
these spirits of nature.
Nature
So
spirits.
nature spirits, the spirits of the trees, the spirits of the water, the spirits of the earth and air, that is particularly those that surround this mountain here. So I like to think of it as the same spirits that the Etruscans, the ancient Etruscans and Celtic people of northern Italy would have been working with thousands of years ago. So getting back to what we were talking about way at the beginning of our conversation is the magic in Italy is so beautiful and wonderful that and it does, because it does go back to those ancient traditions of people that lived here so long ago and were so in tune with nature. So that is what I am talking about. And occasionally they will gift me with things that I need for my altar. Things that I work with from nature. I have a lot of skulls and things like that have just appeared to me on my sort of mountain village doorstep.
You've made the connection between, and this is to me a bit unusual, and I think you're maybe the first person I've spoken to, and I've talked to a lot of folks on the program who consider themselves witches, but you're the only one I've spoken to that makes this connection rather strongly between witchcraft, witches, and UFOs. And you've referenced it a few times already. In fact, it was one of the reasons that you moved in this particular direction. But again, help us understand what you see the connection between witches, witchcraft, and the UFO phenomena.
Okay, on a personal note, it's because I think because I've had so many sort of UFO experiences that sort of it has sort of opened my worldview into another realm. Whereas on a grander view, within my research of historical witches and places where witches would have processionals, there is also a correlation between modern UFO events. So it could be lights in the sky, or it could even be what people are seeing and experiencing as a structured sort of spaceship. And from that, I sort of make that connection, if that makes sense. It's like there is a connection between places where, especially here in Europe, where there was a tradition of witchcraft, where there is also lights in the sky, spook lights, supernatural experience, and things that go on in modern times that could be considered UFO related.
So I might be jumping to some assumptions or conclusions here, so guide me through this. If you see this connection between witchcraft and witches and UFO phenomena, then are we then talking about the UFO phenomena not being something extraterrestrial, not being visitors from another planet, but in fact being some kind of manifestation from the magic itself?
That is where I'm coming from.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
That is my point of view. And and because when I flipped the scientific hat on, I have to be honest and say, I cannot 100% say that is the absolute truth, but I do believe from my experience that is exactly what it is.
Well, Susan, I think you're in safe territory here, because I don't think anybody can say with certainty what this phenomena is. That's one of the things that makes it so fun to talk about, is that there's so much mystery surrounding it. And I'm really, really pleased and actually interested in your point of view here, because it's not one that I've heard before. I do have a question that's flowed through my chat room a couple of times. I don't know that I understand it, so I'm just going to ask it verbatim, and I hope it's an okay question. But one of our listeners wants to know if you practice blood rituals.
I I have in the past, but it's not something I would do.
What does that mean,
as
Susan?
daily
What is a
practice.
blood ritual?
I'm assuming that what the chat person means is like using blood as part of a ritual, one's own blood.
Okay.
I would never use blood of another being, but I have used blood of my own as part of trying to enact a ritual. It's not something I do on a regular basis, but I've experimented with it in the past myself, my own blood, not someone else's or another being. No.
When we talk about bringing this conversation back to the magic and the witchcraft component, when we talk about that, when you have success in, as you put it, affecting an outcome, where does the energy come from? Where does the force come from that makes that change, that pushes that probability in the direction that you want it to be pushed? Where is that source?
That source, I would say, is whatever it is that is giving us the reality or what we perceive as our day-to-day reality, whatever that source truly is. So if we want to try and explain it from a more scientific point of view, maybe it has something to do with the quantum mechanics or the micro sort of world that we have or that we live in, where things can be changed, matter can be changed, time can be changed. That's sort of something that I can't really, certainly not until I have another cup of coffee, even attempt to explain. But I think that it is that whatever it is that is sort of creating our reality around us, that is what is being manipulated. And I think that one of the things that should be mentioned, because in case people are like, oh my goodness, there's groups of witches that are going to change everything, and then we're going to be on a completely different planet or whatever. I think that reality has some sort of self-healing, so that if I can enact a little bit of change and maybe win that sort of gift certificate from the bookshop that I was explaining earlier, that's one thing. But to do something larger or greater, I think that reality itself heals itself or has some sort of self healing or fixing of itself, so that you can only do so much.
Right. You referenced your husband's work. Now I have to ask you, he sounds like he's the epitome of a scientist, a scientific-minded person. You said he's an astrophysicist?
Yeah, some of your listeners might know him, Dr. Massimo Teodorani. He led a lot of the work in Hessdalen, Norway, on the mystery lights there.
Oh, wow, okay.
In the early 2000s.
Well, I was going to ask, someone who is so grounded in science, which I'm assuming your husband has to be for the work he does, what does he think of what you do, and does he participate?
No, like he is very supportive, but no, he himself is not doing witchcraft or would not identify as a witch. But he is very supportive, and he is very open-minded as a scientist to the idea that we don't know everything, and that there is still a lot more to learn, and that there is something to these people's experiences. Because people like myself who have had very strange experiences throughout life, and including with other people present, there is something more there. It may not be explainable in scientific terms in this sort of epoch that we are in, but that doesn't mean that it's any less valid. It is a human experience. And so that is what I find very fascinating from a research standpoint. And he does too. And of course, is respectful and accepting of the fact of my spirituality and how I view things. Like I said, it's paganism and witches who are pagan very much. It works with science because it is tethered into the physical world. Like, it's we honor nature.
Right. You mentioned the Benandanti earlier. Tell us more about who the Benandanti are or were, And I know also in the book you talk about shamanic shape-shifting. Let's bring all this together. And I think you even make a reference to Skinwalker Ranch, which I'm sure all of our listeners are familiar with. So tie all that together for us.
Yeah. Well, it's because with the Skinwalker Ranch, they're the sort of those wolf beings. And they remind me of some of the stories of the Benedante. These were witches who lived in the Middle Ages,
Mm-hmm.
and the reason we know of them was a fellow by the name of Professor Carlo Ginzburg, who was lucky enough to get into the Vatican archives in the 1960s, and he found all this sort of paperwork on this documentation of these witches and what they were doing. And part of what they were doing was shape-shifting in a shamanic sense into wolves, and they would protect their villages, and they would work with what we would consider fairies and the goddess to do sort of divination to find out what was going to happen in their villages. And of course, the Catholic Church was no, this is not good.
Right.
You can't be doing this. This is when they got word of this. So this was all their sort of persecution. This was all documented by the Inquisition, and so how this all ties in is that it started my research down the road because of my own personal experiences with creating this sort of wolf-like being, which I came to the conclusion that I created to protect myself.
This is again back when
they were doing
when you were a child.
When I was a child.
Yes.
When I was a little child. So that sort of, to me, there was this sort of correlation. It seemed like, wow, these witches were doing this, and this is something I did, even not knowing what I was doing as a child. So I made that sort of connection. And from there, I started researching more witches from that area and this particular part of Central Europe, and came up with all sorts of interesting anecdotes and documents from that era of witch trials, where you have werewolves, shape-shifting, witches being accused of shape-shifting into werewolves, cattle mutilations of domestic animals, which sound very similar to things that are going on in the Skinwalker Ranch, where you have these wolf-like beings that seem to be very supernatural. And you have these horrendous things happening with animals. And this is how I sort of find all these things that are connected. But they are, like I said, all this kind of stuff will be more part of the second book. Although some of it, like the shape-shifting and the Benedante, and that is discussed within my current book, Cosmic Witch. So it's sort of interesting to me how these modern experiences, which Skinwalker is modern, sort of relate back to these other practices and experiences that are described as very similar, happening at opposite end of the planet centuries ago. Like if you read them, they're very similar in how they're occurring.
If you had someone who approached you and said, I am interested in learning more about what you do. Obviously, your book helps. That's a great start. But what other advice would you give people who find this discussion we're having very, very interesting, and maybe they say, you know what, this sounds like, my universe. This sounds like the way I think. I want to pursue this. What kind of advice would you give them after they read your book?
After they read my book, anybody who wants to contact me, I'm quite available online. I like to hear from people, and whether it's people who are experiencers like myself or people who want to pursue these types of experiments that I've been talking about, you can get a hold of me via my website, which is susandemeter.com. I'm going to just plug that one more time.
No, that's fine.
And there are many, like in the book itself, there are many sort of different and eclectic bibliography of reference material that I've used in regards to modern witchcraft, in regards to the supernatural, different types of experiments. Like I said, that Owen's book on the Philip experiment is what initially sparked my ideas towards trying to create the UFO. And that, I don't know if that's still in print, but you can probably find a copy maybe on eBay or Amazon. So these are types of things that I do. I mention on my blog and my website and in the bibliography of the book itself, different sort of references to sort of start people off to doing their own work. And I think that that's ultimately what I'm trying to do with Cosmic Witch, is to share my experiences, to share what I've tried to do and what I'm trying to do, and the lenses and tools I'm using to explore UFOs and paranormal, and maybe spark other people into doing the same thing, or similar, or doing their own thing, but with, maybe some inspiration. If I can do that, I'll think it's all worthwhile.
Maybe your book addresses this, but what if someone is interested in pursuing this, but they're afraid of the connotations that we talked about earlier in our discussion, or they're afraid what their family will think? What kind of advice do you give someone like that?
I think that we have to be true to ourselves, really, in the end. I mean, I understand that, especially when we're young. I think that you really have to sort of explore and be true to yourself. And as long as you feel good about what you're doing and that you're not causing harm to others, then you should be free to explore all these different things. There's no one perfect path if you're looking for spirituality. But there could be many, many different paths. And it's just something that I would encourage people to explore for themselves. Don't let other people, or their judgments, I wouldn't let other people's judgments sort of cloud what I want to do. We have to all be true to ourselves. That would be my advice, is to go out and do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. The book is called Cosmic Witch. Do you need to have any knowledge ahead of reading this book, or will it make sense to anyone who's interested?
This book will make sense to anyone. It really is. It is part sort of autobiography and part sort of reference book. Mm-hmm. It will make sense to anybody, because it really goes to the basic of what is a witch, which is a broad term. I borrow from many, many different traditions discussing different tools of the witch. So no, it would absolutely appeal to anybody. I also talk, there's a chapter in there about male witches and how men channel that female energy, I believe, and men can be as well a witch. So that's, people sometimes just view the female witch. So there's all sorts of things in the book that I think would appeal to a vast sort of audience.
And we don't want to rush you, and we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. But you said, you've talked about book number 2 here a few times. I'm assuming that's something you're working on now. And do you have an anticipated release date for that? And what other projects are you working on?
That is the first, or the book I'm working on right now is going to be probably, I'm hoping for early 2021 is what the publisher and I are sort of kicking around as a date for that one. Mm-hmm. I believe it is next week. I am part of a streamathon for the anomaliesarchive.org, which is a free streamathon for anybody who's interested in seeing various presentations. I'm giving a presentation on spook lights. And it's sort of spook lights as a pilgrimage, or a site of pilgrimage. And I talk about my work, sort of boots on the ground as a field researcher, looking into these various light phenomena, which I've done in North America and as well as I've done in Europe. And so I am doing that presentation, and I think it's next Saturday, but you could check it out. It's anomaliesarchives.org. It is a sort of a fundraiser, but the presentations are free to watch, and there's many different sort of paranormal investigators. So if people are interested in that, that's coming up right away. And then there's another book I'm working on, which is more of a parapsychological book, looking at times of crisis, such as what we're living through now, and how the paranormal is experienced in times of war and times of pandemic. So that's also probably going to be released in 2021. So 2 books I'm working on, and this presentation that I've just done, which can be viewed probably next Saturday, I believe.
The book is Cosmic Witch. You've told us once, but again, tell us where people can find it and give us your website again.
Okay, my website is susandemeter.com, and Cosmic Witch, Magic, Witchcraft, and the Supernatural can be found on Amazon or can be ordered through your independent local bookstore, which I'm really always in support of the local business. So if you can do that, that would be great. And it's also in Italian, The Witch, La Strega. So either or, Amazon, your local bookstore, and my website, susandemeter.com. And please reach out to me. I'm always interested in hearing from other people and their experiences and experiment ideas.
Susan, thank you again for rising above and beyond the call of duty, getting up super early to do this discussion with us. And thank you for sharing your story, and best of luck with the book. We appreciate you being here tonight.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. And like I said, I hope I sounded okay and coherent. It is 6 a.m. here in Italy.
You sounded great.
I'm going to go have another. Yeah, I need another espresso.
Yeah, you sounded great, and you deserve the espresso. And please promise that when any of your other work gets completed or anything else comes up that you think is something you want to talk about, you reach out to us, because we'd love to have you back on the show.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Beyond Reality Paranormal is hosted by J.V. Johnson and produced by Orion Palmer and Slick Eddie Edwards. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please consider supporting the program either through your podcast platform, click on the link in the description, or on Patreon at Joha Productions. If you'd like to be a guest on Beyond Reality Paranormal, or you have a recommendation for a guest, contact our producer, Slick Eddie Edwards. Eddie is spelled with a Y, at slickeddieedwards@gmail.com.